Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Linkus, and this is Courtney Hollis. And today we will be discussing our research examining the impact of life events and achievements on income status. So we know that many people in the US struggle to afford their basic living expenses. The purpose of our research is to identify correlations between attributes in the population that are associated with poverty. For example, if we find that access to education is correlated with better standard of living, then we can empower our audience to take that understanding and use it to influence community policy.
So we focused on 4 attributes for this. We separated them into life events and achievements. We wanted to look at mobility, which is whether someone has moved from home to home. We looked at veteran status, education, and home ownership. We needed to limit our project scope because the continental United States is quite large. So we focused on 2 states, Hawaii and Virginia, partially because Hawaii is geographically isolated, so it could have some effect on mobility, but also because the industries between the 2 states strongly differ. Virginia has more of an agricultural focus, whereas Hawaii tends to focus on tourism. This is a diagram about our data processing. So what we did was we pulled data from the Census Bureau and the Department of Veteran Affairs, and we put it into Databricks. Databricks allowed us to do all of our data processing and management, and then create dashboards for visualization. From there, we exported those dashboards in HTML format so that we can get a lot of the interactivity from them, and we put them in Amazon S3. Okay. So the first attribute we want to talk about is mobility. So if you see on the left, it's talking about the mobility by state. You'll notice that despite the fact that Virginia has a much higher population than Hawaii, Hawaii is that color in the bottom. The trends between the states are actually quite similar. And if you look at the mobility by state here, it's another way of seeing the same thing. And what you'll see is that most people simply don't move. And if they do move, they tend to move within the same county, so they don't go far. And then here, we can show that as the poverty increases, the chance that you will move also increases, meaning that the more money you make, the less likely you are to move anywhere, which we thought was interesting.
So our next attribute that we looked at is homeownership. And here we compared those who own their home versus those who rent. And we found that there are more homeowners than renters, which was a little bit of a surprise for us. We also compared home occupation by educational level. So on the left here, we're looking at homeownership. And as you can see, as education increases, the likelihood of owning a home also increases. However, that increase isn't as large as you might expect it to be. And here is just another way of visualizing the same information. So the higher your education, the more likely you are to own a home, as you can see by these darker bars. Next, we looked at education. So here we're comparing the total population in red to the amount of poverty in both Hawaii and Virginia. The greater your educational level, the less likely you are to live in poverty, and that trend tends to be consistent throughout those states. And here you see that in the state of Virginia, you are better off as a high school graduate and above. However, if you are less than a high school graduate, you actually are more likely to be in poverty than you would be if you were living in Hawaii. And I will turn it back to Courtney.
Great. So the last attribute we looked into was veteranism. We did some digging into wartime and peacetime veterans, and what we found is that most veterans are actually wartime veterans. So we can assume that most people who signed up for the service were in the service during some conflict. That doesn't necessarily mean that they went to combat, however. As if you look here at the population by veteran status, you'll notice that veterans take up about 8 to 10% of the population between the 2 states. However, they only take up about 5% of the poverty threshold, meaning that you are significantly less likely to be in poverty if you are a veteran. And if you see here, between Hawaii and Virginia, the trends are actually quite similar for both veterans and non-veterans. And what you'll see is that for veterans, they tend to be more on the poverty side as they're younger. However, they're significantly less povertous when they're younger. And then they get better and then they get worse again, which is interesting, especially when you compare that to non-veterans who are more povertous when they're younger, and then they tend to gain some wealth and plateau. They don't change much after that point. So where should we go next? We would want to look at more granular data about individuals. A lot of the, as opposed to predefined groups, a lot of the census data is cleaned for to protect privacy. So we would like to get more, be able to dig into that data more. We'd like to have more comparisons into age groups. We want to cross-reference our attributes more. We'd like to compare pre-pandemic data to post-pandemic data, which could be interesting. We would want to investigate combat veterans as opposed to wartime veterans. And then we also found that poverty is not a good indicator of a basic standard of living. We would like to investigate other measures that better describe a more realistic standard.